Behind the scenes, ground crew in Britain and France work round the clock to keep this machine in the air. Maintaining the systems and bodywork of a vehicle that has stretched and shrunk every day for the last 18 years requires constant care.
The nozzle control stuff.
Every nut and bolt is checked by people like Ricky Bastin and John Dunleavy, who have dedicated most of their working lives to it.
Concorde is said by many to be the last of the engineers' aircraft. It's got all the complexity of a modern aircraft, and in a lot of respects more so. But when you get a problem, you have to get right back down to some really logical thinking, think it through, and it can take hours to sort out a problem.
Most of the people involved with this aircraft have been with it quite some time now, and it's daily enthusiasm, 24 hours a day for most of us.
Half an hour of the flight, you're walking uphill, definitely, and you get pain in your calves and in your back, but then we level off, so it's a bit easier during the flight. But for the first half an hour, we're definitely climbing a mountain.
It's like the difference between a Ferrari and a Rolls-Royce. If you want a Rolls-Royce, you go on a 747-400. If you want a Ferrari Testarossa, you go on Concorde.
I remember being at school, and I remember Concorde coming over. And I worked at junior school, actually, and it shattered the lower windows of the school because it was doing a flyby. And I remember looking up, thinking, what a wonderful aircraft, never thinking that I would work on it.
This is the story of a great big gamble by a handful of men who have to be years ahead of their time. It happens to be the story of an aeroplane that doesn't exist. If it flies, well, flying in it will be like putting Granny in a missile, just 7 years from now. It could halve the world or double the misery of living on it. If the gamble comes off, it could win $1 billion market. If it fails, we'll be left with a great big white elephant with its feet stuck firmly on both sides of the English Channel.
Concorde's roots go right back to the 1940s, when the idea of a supersonic passenger plane travelling at twice the speed of sound was just an aerodynamicist's dream. Dietrich Cushman had worked on jet engines and high-speed fighters like the Messerschmitt in Germany. He went on to lead a team of men and women at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. It was their work which was to determine Concorde's shape. On the team was a gifted German mathematician, Dr. Johanna Weber.
I was actually not trained to be an aerodynamicist. I was trained to be a school teacher, and therefore one of my subjects was mathematics. Cushman looked over the whole tapestry, but we smaller minions did all our little bits, or tried to do them, and he kept us at doing them.
The challenge was to find a wing shape which could fly supersonically and also provide the stability needed at lower speeds. Mathematical calculations led Cushman to the slender delta wing shape.
Cushman and Meskel were looking seriously at a lot of experiments done on slender wings. First, just rectangular wings, which had the bad flow, but also the type of delta wings. And then Cushman got the very good idea and thought, can't we get controlled flow with these kind of wings? That was the essential thing. First, to have stable, reliable, what he called healthy flows.
Cushman's breakthrough was the discovery of these healthy airflows caused by the slender delta shape. In flight, air is disturbed by the front edge of the wings and forms circular swirls above them. This provided the extra lift and stability needed to cope with the slower speeds of landing and takeoff. It was William Gray, a former fighter pilot also working at Farnborough, who demonstrated that Cushman's calculations would work in practice. He was assisted by a young aerodynamicist, Dr. Jean Ross.
There had been some work done in America on models similar to this in a wind tunnel, which showed that in fact they became uncontrollable laterally. You would get an oscillation that built up. And what Gray did was to fly models which had got the right sort of weight distribution, and he would fly them. He would throw them off the top of tall buildings, off the top of the control tower, and then also worked in the 24-foot tunnel here, and showing them that you could fly at the sort of angles of attack that one needed to land safely. My involvement in the test was mainly as a sort of ball girl to go and pick the models up when he'd thrown it from somewhere. There was a team of us took it in turns to do that. We'd got younger legs than he had. But also, I was in a team that was working to sort out the mathematical theories. It didn't have the electronic computing machines, so we had large offices full of women doing computing exercises.
Cushman's maths and Gray's models helped to convince the Supersonic Transport Advisory Committee of the shape the plane should take. The committee was led by Morian Morgan.
Well, in the course of our work, this sort of shape was evolved as the most likely shape for an aeroplane doing about Mach 2, flying at twice the speed of sound across the Atlantic. It's rather a lovely shape. You really feel if God meant aeroplanes to fly, he meant them to be this shape.
The engines capable of powering supersonic flight already existed and had been developed by Bristol Siddeley in the mid-1940s.
Concorde is powered by 4 Olympus jet engines, the design of which started way back in 1946. They were originally used in the Avro Vulcan jet bomber, which was Britain's main deterrent for many years. And then they were subsequently adapted for power generation, electrical power generation, and for naval ship propulsion. There had to be some big changes to the engine to make it suitable for Concorde. Although the thrust of the engine had been increased by a factor of 2 from the start of the program, it had to be increased again for Concorde, so we finished up with almost 4 times the original design power.
But the British were not alone. At the 1961 Paris Air Show, the French revealed a model of their version of a supersonic passenger aircraft, the Super Caravelle. With remarkably similar designs, the two nations decided to join forces. In 1962, the French and British governments signed a treaty to build a plane newly christened Concorde. 4 companies, 2 in Britain and 2 in France, undertook the production work. It was left to the engineers on the ground in Bristol and Toulouse to make such a complex joint project work in practice.
What we had to do first before starting the development was to agree what everybody would do. And after a long discussion, the agreement was that the British would do the front end of the fuselage, the rear end of the fuselage and the rudder, plus the engine installation. The French would do the rest, that is to say the wing, center fuselage and the landing gear.
In practice, particularly on the design side, there was a lot of interchange of work and collaboration, and in many areas we both worked on the same part of the aeroplane, in fact to get the best overall result for the project.
This is a so integrated aircraft that everybody would have to know what the other was doing to make them fit together.
Alors, où est-ce qu'il travaille en ce moment, Monsieur MacDonald?
Il travaille dans les ateliers.
Dans les ateliers, n'est-ce pas? Dans les ateliers.
Ceci est une fenêtre carrée.
This is a rectangular window square.
No, this
Understanding each other was really quite straightforward. We found it was easiest if we each spoke in our own language, and we found we understood the other guy really quite well.
Dans cette position, sur le côté, là, dans cette bossette.
You propose, therefore, that the bootstrap turbine goes forward here.
People might think it was difficult to get the parts fit together, you know, French working in millimeters, British in inches, but that wasn't a problem. I mean, physical matching of the parts was not a problem.
When we effectively had a glorified Meccano set, parts did in fact go together with remarkably little difficulty in the end. In many ways, the culture was different. I suppose the most obvious one is the length of time we used to spend having lunch in France in the early days of the programme.
We had nice parties in France, and we were playing skittles in Bristol, and they learned playing pétanque in Toulouse.
A plane's skin temperature reaches boiling point when it flies supersonically. So for Concorde, all the materials had to be tested and adapted to cope with extreme heat. By 1965, the tested body parts were beginning to take shape and were put together to form the prototypes. Concorde's future passengers also had to be temperature tested to ensure that the air conditioning system would prevent them from being cooked.
And at Farnborough, in a specimen cabin built into an oven, 10 men are sitting in for the businessmen of the 70s. And for complete realism, each one is heated to represent a human body. 110 watts for a normal person, 125 for one who's slightly intoxicated. What happens if the Concorde's cooling system fails? Do we all get roasted? No, say the experts. It'll be bearable for 10 minutes, long enough for the aircraft to slow down.
Meanwhile, the political temperature was heating up. A Swedish aviation expert, Bo Lundberg, spoke out about the possible dangers of radiation for the supersonic passengers of the future.
Life and man has developed on this planet during millions of years under the shield of the atmosphere that has protected us from dangerous cosmic rays. Why then this extreme hurry to put the ticket-paying passengers at the top of this shield before all the dangers are known?
Though the dangers of radiation from cosmic rays proved unfounded, the airlines of the day took no chances.
Initially, British Airways weren't going to have stewardesses on Concorde because they felt that because of the altitude at which Concorde flies, it would make the girls infertile because of the radiation up there. And in fact, there isn't that much of it at all. And it was quite funny because as soon as Concorde came into service, there was a baby boom on the fleet and everybody started having babies because instead of being away for 3 weeks at a time, everyone was at home for most of the time and only away for a couple of days.
Back in the early 1960s, the stratosphere was unknown territory, and the prototypes were laden down with equipment to monitor its behavior.
Hundreds are working in the apparent chaos of a long electronic tube. Much of the hundreds of miles of wiring needed in the prototypes is special to test aircraft. In the space set aside for passengers in the production aircraft, there now sit twin rows of black boxes. They are there to record all the data from flight tests.
The world caught its first glimpse of Concorde in 1967 as the prototype 001 was rolled out in Toulouse. Brian Calvert, a future Concorde pilot, was among the crowds that day.
In due course, after a little playing by a military band, the hangar doors opened and there was this amazingly beautiful creature sideways onto us, revealed, and a rather theatrical tractor driver came out and got into his cab and towed the aeroplane out in a great arc. The nose of the aeroplane swung over our heads, and all the Caledonian girls went, "Ah," like that, and I thought, I'm going to be a Concorde pilot.
Now began one of the longest periods of test flying in aviation history. Shared by Britain and France, the teams were led by test pilots Brian Trubshaw and André Turcat.
Well, this is the old 001. We flew for the first time on March 2, 1969. And this was our office.
What about the TV set?
Well, for the tech thing? Yes. Do
La roulette est 12 mètres derrière le...
Do they need to be here? Because as
well, the flight test program of Concorde was obviously too long, more than 6 years. This was due first to the difficulty of the technical problems to solve. Everything is new here, but also to the conditions of the Franco-British cooperation.
The most difficult parts
I think, of the whole of the flight test program was actually getting the engine intake combination, you might say, which is called the power plant, to work satisfactorily. There are times when the air going into the engine, you might say, is not digestible. And when it is not digestible, the engine behaves rather like we do when we have something that we can't digest, and there is a loud bang. It's like a large belch in many ways. It spits the air out of the engine, it won't take it.
6 years on, a whole range of improvements was incorporated into the final design.
Big visible modifications have been made, and this is mainly to the nose with a windscreen we can look through, which was not exactly the case for the prototypes, and also the rear part of the fuselage, which is longer and nicer, I think.
When the design started, nobody knew how to make that visor, sliding panel, call it what you like, transparent. So the prototype finished up with a metal visor and a sort of peephole that you could see a little out of. And I always felt that one day it would stick and you wouldn't get it down for landing. And my judgment was that you'd get two for a nice try.
But public attention had become focused on one of Concorde's more spectacular qualities, the sonic boom.
Just as a bow wave attaches itself to a boat, so all the while an aircraft is flying supersonically, it creates two shock waves, one from the front and one from the back, which roll across a swathe of countryside miles wide, to be heard by everybody underneath as a sort of double bang.
Concerned about the effect of the sonic boom, the anti-Concorde project was set up by Richard Wiggs.
It was found by measurements that were carried out by experts that the amount of shaking that was caused to cathedrals, houses and various types of buildings was about 10 times as much as anything else that happened to them, like great storms and thunder. And bits did fall off St David's Cathedral. Chimney stacks fell down, windows were broken, greenhouses were shattered, and quite a substantial amount of money was paid out in compensation for the damage that was caused.
When the airplane was being designed, people expected it would be able to fly over land and cities and so on. It became clear to many of us before we went into service, and certainly after we went into service, that it would never be able to fly anywhere supersonically except over the sea.
Concorde's final production cost escalated tenfold to nearly £2 billion. The rising cost provoked a backlash as the project reached the point of no return.
It was pretty precarious anyway, getting Concorde into service. I don't mean technically, but politically, because it made a wonderful opportunity for everybody to take sides, and everybody from the Bishop of Kingston to Mary Goldring, the economist, and hundreds of other people all had views about Concorde, which they made extremely public. And it was our job simply to make the thing work and to demonstrate in many cases that it wasn't the evil monster that some of them thought it was going to be.
I think for us as cabin crew, it was very exciting being one of the first crews on Concorde. It was very much a pioneering feeling on the fleet. We felt somehow that life was very hard for Concorde. She had a lot of political problems, and there were a lot of people against Concorde on both sides of the Atlantic, and yet it's such a masterpiece of technology. We felt it was a shame she wasn't getting more support and more encouragement.
Across the Channel in France, Concorde received a warmer welcome. Politicians like President Pompidou took pride in their association with the plane. The Concorde pilot, Edouard Chamel, recalls the public's response.
Les Français ont toujours été très fiers de leur passé aéronautique. La France, pendant
de nombreuses années, surtout dans la première partie de l'aviation, ont été très, très actifs dans le domaine de l'aéronautique. Et donc, pour Concorde, la réception a été bonne. Il y a eu peu d'opposants. Il était à la fois très beau, très, très extraordinaire. Et donc, son aventure elle-même a capté les gens, et dans tous les domaines économiques, depuis l'huile végétale, en allant aux montres, les valises, bien sûr, tout ce qui touchait le voyage. C'est la première fois que l'on découvre pour un avion un tel attachement.
But other countries proved less enthusiastic. Of the hundreds of Concordes optioned by the world's airlines, only Air France and British Airways went ahead, ordering 7 each. In January 1976, Concorde was finally launched into passenger service.
Behind Captain Todd, talking to his co-pilot, Captain Calvert, was Concorde's original test pilot, Brian Trubshaw. Today, his original job done, he was taking a back seat.
I was the co-pilot on the first commercial flight from London to Bahrain. We took off at the same time as the French airplane from Paris. They went off to Dakar and Rio de Janeiro, and we went off to Bahrain. There's an enormous amount of equipment packed into a tiny space, and it had more systems, the hydraulic systems, the center of gravity transfer systems. It had more of those than any other kind of aircraft, so it demands great precision, and it's in a sense a more cerebral or intellectual airplane than others because of its complexity.
But Concorde soon hit turbulence. Protest groups in the States fought hard to prevent it landing in New York. Finally, in 1977, after months of legal battles, British Airways and Air France won. Stewardess Charlie Hicks was on one of the first flights.
The New Yorkers have a very sort of dry sense of humour, and I can remember we opened the door and the ground staff who were waiting for us said, "Hi, what catcher? We've been waiting for years." And they're really great fun, and everybody, the ground staff, all made such a fuss of us. And people seemed, we were expecting some sort of anti-feeling, but people seemed very happy to see us. We had quite a lot of trouble with serving the meals at first because people were so excited to be flying at twice the speed of sound that they all wanted their photos taken on board to record this momentous event. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and everybody wanted to be able to say, "I've flown on Concorde," or just to see what it was like. And we carried a lot of famous people, film stars and the pop groups. And I was on one flight once where we brought Superman back. We were all agog to see what he looked like. And everybody was fascinated because he didn't have anything to drink at all, just a glass of milk.
The New York service was a success, but other routes remained closed to Concorde, and the planes often sat idle on the ground. The project had been paid for by the British taxpayer, and now some wanted their own taste of the high life. At the Bell Inn, publican Jock Macaulay and his regulars were the first people to charter Concorde.
I just seen it on the news. I think we just opened the pub at 6 o'clock. And himself here, Mr. Brian Calvert, was within the premises. And it had said on the news it was costing £10 for every man, woman and child in the British Isles extra to whatever it had cost before. And I walked her into the bar, informed Brian of this, and I said, "It's time we chartered this thing before it gets any dearer." And I think you said, "Well, if you can fill a Concorde, 100 people, why don't you have a go?"
I had the pleasure of flying this extraordinary team from Aldworth. A lot of people came up to see what was going on. Grandmothers, brain surgeons, children. My mother-in-law didn't want me to go too far. And all sorts of people came up.
They did. They all wanted to go up and have a look, didn't they, to see what made the thing work.
That's right.
We paid £100, £5 was for coaches, and so much of that went for charity as well. You could just see, well, I reckon you could just see the curve of the Earth, and sort of that to me was fantastic. So I'll never see it again.
We were the only people in the only part of the whole universe at that height, at that speed.
and it was just wonderful. I think one of our friends, his false teeth dropped out. Whether that was because it was going back to or not, I don't know.
Did you enjoy yourself?
The Bell pub trip opened the floodgates for Concorde's lucrative charter business. Together, these flights keep 1 out of the 7 planes busy. But all aeroplanes have a limited lifespan, and when time runs out for Concorde, supersonic travel itself will come to an end.
Transport has always sought to decrease journey times, right from the days of stagecoaches and clipper sailing boats, steamships and aeroplanes. And for the last 30 years, aeroplanes haven't gone any faster, except for Concorde. Now, one of these days, men of vision will do a successor to the aeroplane. Sadly, I don't think the initiative will come from this country. It'll be a big international project. It'll involve America, Japan, and probably the French as well.
On its current rate of usage, Concorde is likely to continue flying till about the end of the century, possibly just into the next century. But we are actually running tests on a British Airways aeroplane to measure in-flight stresses. Hopefully, using those results, we shall be able to keep the aeroplane flying until about the year 2010.
Concorde est un avion, bien sûr, mais c'est le seul avion supersonique au monde actuellement. Concorde, c'est aussi un oiseau et c'est une légende. Ce sera bientôt un mythe. C'est un avion qui a une beauté tout à fait extraordinaire. Et pour finir, je crois que c'est la plus grande aventure humaine de notre siècle.
Only 20 Concordes were ever built. 14 are in airline service, 2 are used for spare parts, and 4 are in museums.
Will we end up in the museum with it, Ricky?
I think when the aircraft stops flying, we will either probably end up in the museum, as John says, or maybe they'll throw us on a rubbish heap somewhere. I think our futures have been, our past and our futures are pretty inexorably linked with this aircraft. It's been a long time, over 50 years between us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be landing shortly in London. Please now return to your seats and ensure that your seatbelts are securely fastened. Thank you for choosing to fly Concorde, the world's fastest passenger aircraft. We look forward to welcoming you on board again soon. Good night now, and thank you.
Well, it's always so impressive. I mean, it's nice to get home, but nice to do it all over again, really.